The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. This is Emily Allen from the International Town and Gown Association. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We have with us back again today. This is kind of fun. It's like a podcast, Kathy. Kathy Hartz from the U.S. Census Bureau. Thank you again for joining us. I'm just going to make a couple of announcements, and then we will go ahead and get started. So again, thank you. This is our second webinar series with the Census Bureau. If you didn't join us, I believe that you can still get the previous showing of what we did 2 weeks ago. So again, we're back with Kathy Hartz from the U.S. Census Bureau to answer your questions. So today is really about question and answer. So we want a lot of interaction. Last time we had some technical difficulties, so hopefully our chat function is up and working. If you could go ahead and use that chat function now to introduce yourself, just say where you're from, and we'll just make sure that that's working again this time. Thanks for doing that. And if not, maybe there's a question function. We'll just go ahead and see if our chat function is working. But again, thank you all for joining us. Emily Allen, incoming president of the International Town and Gown Association. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kathy. And then as we go, I know people will be coming and going, and I'll make a couple of announcements. But Kathy, let's just go ahead and get started because I know people are chomping at the bit to ask some census questions.
Sure. I will touch on the highlights of what's been happening since our last webinar, and then open it to questions. I think that that's the most robust and important part of any of the webinars. I do apologize for not being on screen. I'm still trying to get my camera to work, but I just want to take a moment to again thank ITGA for having us here again. We just greatly appreciate your partnership, and for all of your members that are joining. Your time is precious, we understand, especially in the light of where we are, and we greatly appreciate your continuing to join to help us spread the message that the census is definitely happening, and that even though we have been put in a position of having to pivot on several of our operations, we are still confident that there is going to be, that we're going to be successful in these efforts, thanks mostly to our trusted partners in continuing to stress the importance of the census, how safe it is, and that even at these times of that we're in right now, one of the things that we didn't prepare messaging for this, it was just sort of tucked away, and we do mention it, but you know, in the times that we are in right now, when you hear about federal funds going into areas that have deemed a state of emergency, again, all of that funding is based on your population counts. And so the census is critical more than ever because the federal funding that goes into hospitals, into roads, and things like that, it's prevalent, especially now, unfortunately. So one of the things that I would like to show you is the latest status of where we are on the census, considering that our April 1 activities went to online and social media responses, and then also, you know, things of course have been put on hold. But right now we do have a few states. If you look at the map, it is, you know, we have a few states in that light blue, which indicates 51% and above. And then if you just, you can hover over any particular state and it will give you their current response rates. A lot are close to 51%. So hopefully each day I check this map to see how we're doing as a nation. Puerto Rico is a little bit behind. We would expect that because they have just everything that they had with the hurricane. So we're continuing to monitor that. And I think that, as I said, these are updated daily, and we know that the first, I don't know what the actual percentages of what we expect to get right out of the gate. We are a little bit above that right now, the projection. And as with any census operation, it's the last 20% trying to get to that number, and that's where our hard to count communities are, and that's where we really will be pushing our efforts to try to get this count up by the time we hit August. One of the questions that we get a lot in the last 2 weeks is, has the Census Bureau entertained the idea of asking Congress to create the law to allow us to exceed and submit the counts beyond the December 31st date? We have not considered that at this point. They are still confident that in taking it in 2-week intervals with postponing operations, that our non-response follow-up, even though while it was delayed for 2 weeks, it's now pushing us in July. And so the end of June and July. So we are still waiting to see what happens. And so while we say these dates that the last time we talked, everything had been postponed for 2 weeks. And then in this time frame, another 2 weeks went out, specifically a delay for hiring, because we do not want to put the public at risk, nor do we want to put the enumerators and the workforce for the census at risk either. So that is always going to take precedence over the operations. So moving to the delays on the operations, what is the most hard hit right now that they're seeing? Well, hiring has definitely been suspended. And the reason is that when there are certain aspects of the hiring that are still going on that we can process in-house, by teleworking through our systems. But that work also requires the new workforce, the new employees, to be fingerprinted. So of course, those operations are not happening. And we will, they are in meetings constantly. This is a moving target, and monitoring things, adjustments to timelines will occur. We did not issue a new set of dates. Since the last schedule went out, they just are focusing on 2 that they said are definitely impacted. It's the hiring and also what's called the mobile questionnaire assistance centers. So speaking about MQAs, just a few moments, that this project, our operation, was to send enumerators to large community events, sporting events, activities that are happening then, and specifically for great crowds. So obviously that is not happening. Then there was talk of perhaps when we can start to engage people, bring people together, that perhaps we could go in libraries or community centers. And that, of course, depends strongly on our partnership that we have with the American Library Association and public library associations, who have pretty much closed their doors as well. So we are in conversations with them to see when, it's everybody's guess at this point of when can we start to open this. April, it is not going to be happening. And so we will wait for another 2 weeks to see what, actually it'll be about another 7 days to see what the next round of advice is going to be for us to try to get this count. Until then, we've really leaned in on asking people to respond over the internet. You can see in the response rate map, it will tell you how many people have responded via internet. And then the other portion, when you hover over it, any particular state, and there's New Mexico right now, 33%, 29% is via the internet. So you can, that doesn't mean that people are not responding. The other percentage includes the paper questionnaires and the telephone question, responding via the telephone questionnaire assistance centers. So considering where we are, we're pleased with the responses, but as I stated, we are all concerned because getting to the hard count groups and the people that continue to be undercounted They typically are ones that we have to really focus heavily on during NARFU, non-response follow-up. And during that time, as soon as we can get boots on the ground, we will. But again, it's just delayed. So let me stop just at that moment. We covered a lot. We can continue to unpack that, but I just wanted to see if there were any questions that anybody had right now in the chat box.
Yes, let me get to. Someone would like you to talk more about the e-response. Does each dorm room have a census number? How much information do they need, the census needs from the directory to count?
That is an excellent question, and thank you for bringing that up. So we will go to group quarters operations, which has turned out to be quite challenging. So when we're enumerating any campus, we focus on, with our partners, students living in off-campus housing. That's one operation because they will respond just like anybody else. But in group quarters, the e-response will be for students that are living in what is deemed on-campus housing. There's been some mixed messaging where they're just saying dorms. And on-campus housing can also mean private apartment buildings that have been deemed on campus by the university. So they know who they need to count. And so we are getting some e-responses in already, which was kind of surprising because group quarters was one of those operations that was suspended. And they are busy trying to reach out to the organizations that opted for a paper questionnaire for their students, and obviously with the schools closed, that cannot happen. So they're trying to give them options of can they respond via e-response. Now, thankfully, what has happened is that the messaging in the beginning was that any university that is going to do e-response has to answer the 10 questions. That has since changed. And I will, the group quarters website, I'll post that in the chat box, their direct email, that if you want to call and ask them how many questions need to be answered, you can do that. I don't know what that answer is. And everybody asks whether it's people living in on-campus housing or in off-campus, how many questions can be answered before the questionnaire is rejected. And the same thing is happening with e-response. And group quarters is working with each person that the university has deemed as their, I was using the word the administrator that they've chosen. It's not, and it might very well be an administrator, but it's the person that the university or persons that have selected to be the responding officer for the university. So they are in contact with them now for those, and they haven't gotten all the way through the list, as you can imagine, the number of higher education organizations that they have to be in touch with. But I understand that through higher ed sending in emails to their group quarters address and through phone calls, they are still going through the list, still making contacts. Again, it's not only the higher education portion of it, that's the biggest part, but then there's also, you know, the nursing homes and the other institutions that fall under group quarters operations. So we were really surprised to hear that some of the responses were already coming in from the universities. Those that chose e-response, some are busy and they have successfully submitted their applications, but we have paused those operations, not that they can't respond, but until we get to everybody to say, if you didn't select e-response in the beginning, there's still an opportunity, and we've relaxed the rules a little bit on how many responses to the questions that we need before we take it as a completed questionnaire. Again, the only reason why they were pushing for the 10 questions is that we get once every 10 years to get a snapshot with the data of the country to look at the trends. They've just decided, because of the situation we're in right now, that it's best to reduce the number of questions that they have to answer. Does that help?
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, another question here. If the census finds it can't do a thorough field program, will they consider that a reason to postpone? Without the census running a field program, undercounts would be huge.
So without running a field program, so you're saying canceling a field operation completely, is the way that I'm interpreting the question. So if I'm interpreting
they can't do that thoroughly.
Thoroughly, okay, got it. Right now, it's a little too early to, we are still confident that we're going to be able to conduct these operations thoroughly. So what can happen, again, the question comes in a lot. Students that are living in off-campus housing, what happened? They're all gone. The international students, they've returned to their countries. And what happens, the question that we also received was that, these students are coming back. These international students are coming back in the fall, and they should be counted in the census. Well, our online questionnaire is not valid if you live outside. You cannot respond via email if you are from another country, and that's just for security reasons. So there's all these options being floated around right now. What happens if we pull the data from the most recent survey? We know there's an undercount. I keep referring to, Champaign-Urbana in Illinois with the thousands and thousands and thousands of students that make up that area. And what happens if we don't get a thorough count of the students that are living off campus? So there are the unknowns of, can we delay the operations until they come back? I don't know. It's one of the things on the table. Can we? There are a couple of other options that they are considering, but they are not at the point yet of saying that we're going to go back out and do another census at another point in time. I will tell you about a program that I was part of in 2010. It's called Count Question Resolution. Any counts that a municipality feel are low, they can challenge the census counts. And again, I'm saying this just to let you know that there are plans in place that have been in previous censuses, but the big unknown is what decisions are going to be made in the next 6 weeks. So if we can just separate the Count Question Resolution program from the unknown decisions, because I think that clarity will, of course, help us the further along we get in this. But Count Question Resolution, you can challenge the Census Bureau and say this is an undercount. We know it's an undercount, and then if the challenge is proven in, then we will come back out and do a census and do the area that you feel is strongly undercounted. Having said that, it is on the minds of everybody that these college students that are living in off-campus housing that have gone home, we don't have to worry about the ones that are living in on-campus because they will be captured through their group quarters, through their university. But that leaves a lot of students, and how are we going to get to them? And those conversations are happening. It is on the radar of Census. It is on the radar of the department. And it's just too soon to give you any answers. So my best answer to that, other than the background information that I just gave you, is stay tuned there and to see what type of decisions that they're going to be made. They're going to be making about this particular program, along with a lot of others that are impacted by this.
So yeah, you're getting a lot of questions that I think you've kind of addressed in a stay tuned, but I just want you to hear them.
Yes, I would love to hear them. I can't really see. Are they coming up in the, okay, I don't have the question box.
I don't, so Douglas is getting them to me. So we've got,
I would love to hear
we're keeping them flowing. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm just gonna, I know a lot of people joined us again. This is Emily Allen with the International Town and Gown Association and Kathy Hartz with the Census Bureau, where Kathy is taking your questions. So you have a lot of people saying, with students not coming back, until the fall, how will they get an accurate count? You've got people asking, there was one, what about seniors that are not returning into the community in the fall? So obviously that's a population that, will not be returning at all, not even back in the fall. And then I know you answered this last time, but this will be helpful for everybody to hear it again. So if students have left to go back home and they don't have their unique code, so that got left, you know, in their college town, but they still want to answer the survey, how can they respond to the census without that access code?
Okay, so let's go most recent question to the back, going back. So as far as non-ID, when there's messaging, there's strong messaging that went out across college campuses through apps. There's messaging now that we're delivering in a variety of ways to get to the students through Students Learn, Student Votes, student-led national organizations. Was just on the phone call with a group of people from Ivy League universities and just seeing a lot of wonderful work in messaging that they did. So as far as the non-ID code, when you're completing the census online, it's great to have the code. Obviously, they can't get it because it's sitting in their mailbox on campus. There's a question, do you have a code? And you click yes or no. If you click yes, you enter it. If you click no, it's okay. It takes you on through the questionnaire. And then what we do on the back end is that we go in and match those housing unit addresses to the code and remove it from our system. So this is the first time in a decennial that we have what's called non-ID processing. You do not need to have a code this time in order to successfully complete the census. So what do we do as far as the students that are, it's the group of students that are seniors that are not coming back. The messaging that we have sent, and we've done this through some pretty large organizations, through student-led, and also trying to get to students that are in charge of their respective organization that are on campus through social media apps, etc., that says, you please respond on where you would have been sleeping on April 1. That if you are displaced, you are still to use your university address to respond to the census and the reasons that you should do that, you know, how critical it is, etc. So there's been a major push in messaging through the last 3 weeks for where students should respond. Also, in the press conferences that they're giving at the Census Bureau, it is a high priority for the Director for Higher Education. He is meeting with governing boards for, with the Big Six, that we do have legs to get to the student-led organizations through them as well, to push this messaging. So there's been a pretty big campaign to do that. Having said all that, is it going to work? I don't know. It's a little hard when you think about everything that was going to happen on April 1 with these big events that were going to be taking place on college campuses, not only on that one day. I mean, they were doing a great job in making sure that they got the messaging out about the importance, and then of course the confusion of, well, where do I respond? We hear it now. We hear it from our neighbors that the kids are coming home from college, just being asked, where do we count them again? And so unfortunately, it does fall into the wait and see. These communities, they are not going to tolerate an undercount, nor should they. So as we proceed through the next coming months to figure this out with how we're going to get them and have a successful count, again, it's just stay tuned, and I wish I could provide more information than that, but we just don't know at this point.
Great, thanks. The way I'm getting the questions, I'm just going to read them in order. Some of these you've already answered, but just repeat yourself if you don't mind, Kathy.
Sure.
Okay, great. So going down the list here, does the Census Bureau have suggested language for employers to use to encourage employees to complete?
Yes, we have our partnership webpage with outreach materials. I'll dump that link in the chat box. It is quite extensive. We do not need, right now, all the messaging is there. You do not need to come up with your own messaging. And I'll tell you, while I'm gonna put the link there, in the beginning, the complaint was that we just didn't have enough in there. And now we have so much stuff going to specific organizations. So while this link is posted, and you can go in and see all the fact sheets that we have that will provide talking points, I'm very transparent, probably to a fault, but the best way that I find it is I Google it, and because we have an arrangement with Google that when you Google anything with Census, it's going to come up in the top 3. So I Google, say I wanted to see messaging for how is the 2020 census counting college students. So thank you for, I see it's on the screen, and let's see what comes up. So it will take you through who to count. It'll go down the statement of modifying operations. And the first one, then it'll drop you down to student housing, fact sheet on counting students, and what those talking points are. So again, this link that is going in the chat box, while it's where you can find it for everything, all the materials that we have, it's a lot easier sometimes just to Google it. So let me post that for you now. Every hard to count group, oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And we will include it in our follow-up. So Beth Bagwell will send out to this link as well.
Okay, so even if you scroll down, so there are the partner outreach materials, but if you start to scroll down, you can see all the fact sheets, and it goes on pages and pages and pages of what particular, for one particular group, how should we reach out to them, and the messaging is already written there for you. And we are adding stuff every week, updating the fact sheets, updating the talking points. So that's where you would go.
Great. Okay, let me get back up to these questions. Did you answer what about the students who are not returning in the fall? So the seniors who are graduating?
So the seniors that are graduating, again, we've said to, so this is a point that, you know, I haven't really been able to get a clear answer. The messaging that continues to be where you would have been living on April 1. So that messaging is going to the seniors, it's going to all of the higher ed community and the students. So they need to respond where their school address was on April 1. Whether or not that messaging is going to get to them, we certainly are changing some of our approaches on TV ads, social media ads, targeting social media targeting ads to try to get to them. We have universities that are sending their own messaging to those students, in particular with the seniors, to say, please respond. Do not forget to respond, and the reasons why. That April 1, where you would have been living, it would be on the community, the campus, and please respond with that address. So, you know, the big unknown is through non-response follow-up, because even if when we get to non-response follow-up, what do we do if we have an address, a housing unit address, and we haven't received anything? We'll go knock on the door. If we do not get an answer there, that maybe one of the neighbors are still there. We're hearing that some of these campuses, that these students that had these yearly leases, even though the college shut down, they're still there. They're not there, chose to stay in their apartments. And so if the enumerator, again, once those operations can begin, we'll go to the neighbor and say, do you know anything about the people that are living in this household that are next to you? So it's not, obviously that's not the best, but just even in regular houses, somebody could say, well, yes, I remember there were 3, and these are the sexes of the people that live there, or the genders, but it's just trying to get to them through the messaging. Any duplicates that come in, we of course have to now be concerned with collapsing the questionnaires, because everybody's going to be responding, whereas before they were trying to push messaging that there be one person in charge of responding on behalf of the housing unit. And now, because everybody's displaced, we will be collapsing the answers from that housing unit in order to get an accurate count. So whether or not the messaging is going to work, again, we just have to stay tuned. We will know if there's an undercount in the area. The governing boards for those areas, the elected officials, they will know if it's an undercount. We are anticipating and trying to figure out the best way we can still get an accurate count that is thorough, but there's also plans if we just can't do it, then what do we do? And we have to be able to go back out and do something. How that's going to happen, I just don't know yet.
Great. And again, Kathy, some of these questions you've already answered, but I want people to make sure that they hear their question being asked and get the direct response. Some communities are already talking about requesting a mid-decennial census. Will that be a possible mitigation for recognized undercounts?
So going back to the count question resolution program, typically what happened is in 2010, and it's a program that is open to any municipality, town, city that feels that they have an undercount. And so once the counts are, now this is once the counts are submitted and they realize that they are low, then they put forth the challenge. And if they win the challenge, we go out and we conduct another census. Again, there's strict criteria that are in place for that. But delaying, you said something about, will it be delayed? Could you repeat that part of it again?
Sure. Some communities are already talking about requesting a mid-decennial census. Yeah. Will that be a possible mitigation for recognized undercounts?
Yeah, I don't know for a mid-decennial. That's not an option yet because we are still progressing with operations for the decennial, and we haven't even gotten to the non-response follow-up. So that's the one that is the most critical to determine, do we have an accurate count or not? When people are responding via email or through the telephone or through paper questionnaires, that's the easy part. The first 50% we ought to get there with no problem. A lot of messaging has gone out. It's just getting to those students, the students that have gone off campus, the hard to count groups. That's what is really picked up through non-response follow-up. That is not going to begin until June, end of June, beginning of July. And then responses will end. Will they extend the deadline? Nobody has given any hint on whether or not that's going to happen. I mean, just looking at this, you would think that it probably is very likely. So trying to determine what is a mid-decennial point, I don't think that until we get completely through all the operations and we get the counts, that's when we will know which areas have been undercounted. And again, it's stay tuned to see what the options are going to be. But right now we are still just trying to make decisions that we will be able to capture as many of these people as we possibly can through the regular census operations in a thorough way, even though we've hit pause on some of them.
Great. So this is just a statement from those in the UC, the California system. The UC system has been told we can submit limited data to count our on-campus students using eResponse. We only need to submit name, birthday, and campus address.
Okay.
Okay, so next question. Should staff who live on campus group quarters, so residence halls and fraternity houses, be counted in the information we provide back for Census 2020? So this is regarding staff who live in those facilities.
So again, the clarifying sentence is if staff is living in what is deemed by the university on-campus housing, then they are picked up. And I don't know what addresses the university has flagged as part of their universe. So if their staff is living in on-campus housing, then the university will pick them up in group quarters. But it just depends on what the university has classified as on campus. If they have not been included in that address, then they are considered just like all the other people living in the United States, and that they will respond on their own. So that would be a question as far as which housing units are picked up, if it's staff or by students. That would be something that the university could address. And again, I would point you to the person that has been selected by the university with the charge of the group quarters enumeration and participation.
Great. Okay, next question. Our group quarters administrator is taking the April 1st date literally, but our on-campus students left residence halls before April 1st. Are administrators being told they should count how many would have been living in on-campus housing pre-COVID? If not, we will have a huge undercount. Again, questions you've answered, but I want people to hear their questions.
Okay, I appreciate the repeat of the question. So group quarters, when they're counting on-campus housing, it's one of the most successful operations that I've ever been part of, because you have the files. You have the files, they will know who is counted on campus, they will include them, even if they've gone home. Their universe is not going to change. They will still, even though you say the April, that some administrators are looking at the April 1 date, they have also been they've been giving the message that whoever is living, who would have been living in those dorms, in those privately owned apartments that are deemed on-campus housing, will be included in the group quarters count.
Great. Okay. There's confusion among our off-campus students who have now gone home about whether they should now be counted by their parents. Again, we'll reiterate, counted where they were supposed to be April 1st.
Yes.
Okay, in Ames, Iowa, we have some census tracts with over 72% return rates, but our international student housing is at 24.8, and our no student areas are above 45.1. Is the Census Bureau actually looking at these census tracts as evidence of a needed recount or delayed count?
So what will happen, they're going to be looking at the tracts, but the responsibility, it's going to be a shared responsibility. We will be working with municipalities. Again, through 2010, 2000, 1990, it was through the Count Question Resolution Program, where tracts are submitted by the municipalities saying that in 2010, let's just use this as an example. It's probably a poor example, but it's better than nothing right now. It's the first thing that's coming in my mind. In 2010, our survey, or if there was any other survey conducted in that area after 2010, they can easily look at those rates. They can do projections on what they think that they're with the different apartment folks, how many people were occupying apartments versus not in their building. Was their building 20% occupied? Was it 80% occupied? And then doing that analysis with the universities, with the municipalities, to show that there is an undercount. Of course, the Census Bureau, we don't have the staff to do all of that, and that is where through CQR, they submitted their maps and said during this they had to, you have to provide proof. We have this level of an undercount, and in 2010. And even with that undercount, here's our population. And now here we are in 2020, and the projection is pretty much the same, and these numbers are being reported. So of course, you go back to the tracks and you do a compare to see which areas may be the most undercounted that you have in the off-campus housing. So it's a combination of looking at CQR data from the program submissions of the municipalities, looking at our own data to see if tracts or areas are undercounted. Are we going to be able to get so granular that we're looking at every tract across the United States to see which ones are the most undercounted? No, we can't do that without the help of the municipalities. And again, if we get to the point where they are undercounted, we do have a special enumerations branch. That's not something that I think that people really want to hear, that that's an option that's available. However, it is at the cost of the people living the towns and the cities that are requesting a second enumeration. but that's under regular circumstances. To use as an example, Palm Springs, they were considering a special enumeration, even though the Census Bureau, when they filed a CQR challenge, there wasn't anything that we could find fault with, meaning falsification, in reviewing all the records. It was just that people were not responding the way that that we had hoped. So sometimes cities and towns, they can, if they're close to a mark of getting a grant, they can have us come back out and do a census, re-enumerate at their dime. But this is going to be a completely different situation, because again, there are so many unknowns. We just don't know what the undercount is going to look like, and to the severity that it is, it's anybody's guess at this point. But we are still trying to get the messaging in our the television ads that we're doing. Of course, we're having a shift because you know, taking into account now that you can't be advertising things and answer your census in this big crowd. But trying to determine what the undercounted areas and who's going to be impacted the most while we're trying to conduct the decennial census, while it's on the minds and it's not being lost, it's on the radar of it. But right now, we're still just trying to make sure that we get this count right. But there will be plans in place. Conversations are happening for undercounted areas. But right now, the focus is that we just have this opportunity to try to get this thing done right.
Great. So the follow-up to that was, is the city responsible for tracking our own undercounts? So it sounds like they should be advocating, correct, for themselves?
Well, yeah, at the end of the census, when we do have these programs in place, and again, I don't know what's coming down the line. Those decisions have not been made, if anything. But if areas are undercounted, typically what has happened in the past through the Count Question Resolution program is that those municipalities and those elected officials, they produce the maps or the data to show that there is a strong undercount, and then the statement as to why they think it is. So towns involving, you know, students living off campus, that's a pretty easy one to say the justification of why there's an undercount, if it turns out that there is.
Great. Where can we find more information on Count Question Resolution to share with leadership and others who are concerned?
So I was hesitant, and I told my bosses, I said, look, we have to get this information out there about Count Question Resolution, because it's going to be an option. And they said, don't do it. And I said, no, we're going to have to do it, because we're going to have to let people know that this program does exist. Now, having said that, to let you know that the program does exist, the Count Question Resolution Office is staffing up right now. That's not a program that kicks into full gear until after the counts have been delivered. There's a lot of stuff that has to be published in the Federal Register notice about the program. I'm going to see if anything about Count Question Resolution from 2010 comes up. But right now, they do not have a website for 2020, because that operation is not slated to begin until 2021. All right, and in looking at this, the Count Question Resolution program, it only talks about the 2010 program. And that's what I would expect, because before we kick off any kind of a program or an operation, there's a lot of laws that we're governed by, things that we have to publish in the Federal Register notice. So I would say just point your officials to Count Question Resolution, Google it for 2010, and you will find some information there with talking points. Will it be the same in 2020? There will be some updates. Surely there will be updates. But just to let people know that that is an option for them when they know that there is an undercount in their area, that we are prepared. And then once the undercount, if it's proven, and it's proven because of fault of the Census Bureau, that we will go out and we will do another enumeration. So that is a program that is coming up. It's just not time to flip the switch on that. We are governed by Congress with our operations of when they start, when they stop. And right now, count, question, resolution hasn't started yet. And it's about a 3-year program. It runs for a long time, but it's just a little too soon to post any information about the branch, about the operation, because again, everything that we have to follow as far as posting anything in the Federal Register notice about the program and the operation itself.
Great. Okay, so this is a specific question. If students know of other students, such as roommates, who have claimed their parents' address, should the roommate who is aware of this error fill out the form listing that other roommate, even though that person has already been listed at their home or claimed at their home by their parents?
If the person has already been counted through their parents, then that is where they have to remain. The question that we have is, and I'll have an answer within the next 2 weeks or whenever we meet again or whenever you send out your notes. Can somebody go in and modify a questionnaire? They can go in and add somebody. If they submit their questionnaire and they realize they forgot somebody, they can go in and add. The question that we continue to have is exactly that. Can somebody go in and delete somebody from a questionnaire that was already submitted and then have them assigned to another housing unit address? And we're still waiting on the answer, and I'll report that for your follow-up notes.
Great, thank you. We've got lots more questions. You're doing great, Kathy. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for hanging in there. We know this is a lot of information, but everybody's craving it. So is the benchmark for an accurate count based off of the 2010 census?
That's a good question, and I do not have the answer to that because I think it would entail other surveys that we conduct and other data that's out there regarding the municipalities' population counts. But not being able to cite what surveys and what administrative records we might pull in to determine if there's an undercount or not, I'm not able to answer the question, but I can get that information for you. I would think that it's just not strictly the 2010 counts. There are other data that we look at that can determine a city's or a town's population. And that's one thing that we saw in submissions through CQR, that they not only cite census data, but they also cite other data that they have at their disposal. I mean, you talk about, utility records. We saw a lot of those coming in because if a housing unit is occupied, they're going to have running water or electricity. And so a lot of that data came in to support the arguments of that there was an undercount. Because what the cities did, they told us what the count really should be, that what they would project based on the data they had from their different sources. So it's not just 2010 census data.
Great. With off-campus housing, can the Census Bureau request information from landlords as a way to mitigate potential for undercount? For example, number of people in the unit, gender, etc.
Yeah. We have done that in the past for units where apartment buildings that will not let the enumerators go to the apartment numbers or the condo numbers that have not responded. That is something that was a last resort because again, the condo owners or the apartment owners don't have all the information that was required or that we had hoped to get on for the 10 questions. So we would really press hard to get access into the building. But again, I mean, think about gated communities where you have singular houses that they say, no, you're not going in. Can we deal with the governing board over the homeowners associations? Will you give us the information that way? So we have done some of that in the past as a last resort. Will we do it this time? Again, stay tuned because we are just not at that point yet of where a decision has been made of what are the other alternatives in trying to secure an accurate count within a building. There are absolutely ways to get that count. But whether or not we're going to be able to do it legally There will be other suggestions come up, but again, we just need to get through these certain operations and then make the determination if they've been successful or not. And the data will prove that in. It's not anything that the Census Bureau is saying, oh, we were very successful in this. No, all you have to do is look at the data, and that'll tell you if you've been successful or not. And you have a lot of people that will be looking at that data, particularly from those towns and cities that are saying, no, you were not successful. And so then what happens after that to be decided.
So this is kind of going along with the theme here for off-campus housing. So many census tracts getting undercounted did not have high-density student housing in 2010. How do we prove an undercount now without 2010 evidence?
Oh, you can prove. Let me clarify. I misunderstood the question. It's not that we don't use 2010 census data to prove an undercount. You absolutely, that would be one of your data universes. It's just that is it the only one? So I was answering on behalf of, it's not the only one. There are other resources that we look at to prove what and that other people can do to prove in what the population should be in that area. But 2010, do you look at that data? Sure. Is it the only data source that you look at? Absolutely not. There are other data sources that are considered as well.
And this is going back up to the question around costs for a recount. Those census recounts have costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars for cities in the past. It cost Ames, Iowa, about $400,000 12 years ago. Will the Census Bureau pay for these recounts, or are cities still going to have to pay if a recount is needed?
Again, it just depends. If take for example Chicago and Illinois and Iowa also. To have in count question resolution, if it was deemed that the Census Bureau has made mistakes or because of certain things that we couldn't get an accurate count, the program was structured that would we come out and do re-enumerate at our expense, at the government's expense. If it's proven in, yes, then we will come out and re-enumerate. More times than not, it was simply because people in the area chose not to respond. The city of Chicago had a tremendous undercount. It sounds like Iowa did too. And so different cities and towns have to weigh if it's truly just because people would not respond. If we come out again and we enumerate your area again, are you going to hit the same wall that people are just not going to open their doors and respond to us? So the most frustrating thing about this, whenever I look at census data, is that they'll say, you know, we have an 80% or 75% response rate from this area, and that's they tout that as a wildly successful response rate to a survey. It drives me crazy because we're missing 25% of the people there, and when you add the amount of money that is lost because we couldn't get to that other 25%, it's just astronomical of what communities continue to lose year after year after year. So if a city pays to have us come out, they do an analysis of how much different will the counts be if it was based simply because we could not get the people living in our areas to open their doors or to get online or to respond via telephone. So it's a very complex decision that people make to figure out if, because the Census Bureau will only come out if it is a problem with how our enumerators conducted the operation. And again, we're at different times, so I'm certain a new classification is going to be added to that because of COVID-19. But if it is simply because an area they could not get people to respond, they have to balance. That will be on their dime to have us come back out and conduct a special census. And they have to carefully think about, is it going to be worth the money?
Great, thank you. And Kathy, we've got one more question for you unless we see any others come in. There have been a few people in our area who have received census packets asking for their Social Security number, which are bogus. What can be done about these scams?
So we have made a concerted effort. These are going to happen. We saw them early on. We get continued updates of where they're popping up in certain areas, if it's just targeted to a certain demographic area or not. So we have tried in our messaging. The Census Bureau asks 10 questions. It never asks for your Social Security number. It never asks for banking information. As trusted voices, we depend strongly that on the complete count committees, because we know the areas that they're showing up in, that the complete count committees then use their voice to say, don't answer these questionnaires. They are not legitimate census questionnaires, that the census does not ask for any of that type of information. It's happening. It will continue to happen. We have even, both political parties have been guilty of doing it over the past decennial censuses, which you think that that would be something that we could shut down, because Congress people, senators, we're all one nation, and sending out anything like this that could be used to gather political information for people and garner contributions to whatever party you're part of. And again, both parties have done this, so we can't even get in agreement that they would stop doing that. So but then you get into the scary areas where people are asking for Social Security numbers, total scams. And there's an 800 number always listed on every census questionnaire. Even working for the Census Bureau, if I got a questionnaire in the mail, I know what to look for, but the first thing I would be doing is I would call that 800 number. You will be confident at the end of that whether or not it is a survey that is going on in your area, because again, we do 150 surveys at any given time, and so when we add the decennial, those surveys, they keep going on, and people say, oh, I just did this one, and is this legitimate or not? So again, it's just through messaging that call the 800 number. We continue to pass the messaging that we do not ask for any banking information or Social Security information, and we try to shut them down when we hear about them. There are measures that we take to try to push those, but and to try to have them, the organizations doing that, to stop. Are we successful? Sometimes, sure. Are they going to continue to happen? Absolutely.
Great. I know that we are running out of time, but we do have one question that's seeking clarification. To clarify, are these missing students going to be considered a Census Bureau error? How do we prove that they simply didn't ignore the census? If we are telling the Census Bureau now that students are gone and the Census Bureau comes out to enumerate anyway, isn't that a Census Bureau error?
Yes, I absolutely agree with you on that one. But what decisions will be made, as I said, that the undercount of students living in off-campus housing is of concern. The conversations are already happening. Are they happening at a level that are displacing what we have to do right now as far as operations are concerned? No. But are they on the radar screen? Absolutely. How this is going to turn out as far as what is going to constitute, because basically it comes down to we do not have an accurate count. We are there's a gross undercount. Who's going to pay for you to come out and do this again? And so again, those decisions have not been made. It is still premature, but the only reason why I offer it is to let you know is that those conversations, it's already on the radar. We're very concerned about that, along with some other groups that fall under group quarters. And so how are we going to collectively address this? What are we going to do? And right now, it's just premature to be making any kind of decisions on that. But
Great,
stay tuned.
You.
As soon as we hear anything, we will absolutely report that out.
Thank you again, Kathy, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. An exciting announcement. I know that we are still social distancing and probably will be for a while, but ITGA, while we will not be having our Boulder conference, ITGA will still be coming to you virtually. So we will be holding a virtual ITGA conference, which is very exciting. More information to come. Again, Kathy, a huge thank you. You have been a terrific Census Bureau partner. We can't thank you enough. Keep the questions coming, everybody. If we want to do another one of these webinars, please email both Beth and myself with any questions. We'll connect with Kathy to get a future date. Again, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one. Thank you. Bye.